Welcome back to the Zelda Game Club for the Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. This is a community-driven series where we play through classic Legend of Zelda games together as a Triforce Times community, and this is part 3, and also the finale of A Link to the Past, arguably one of the best games in the Zelda series. Well, today we're going to go through the Ice Palace, Misery Mire, Turtle Rock, and finally Ganon's Tower to save Princess Zelda, and then beat Ganon. I'm also going to be highlighting community comments, as we've had Triforce Times community members playing along. Well, before we go back to the game, I wanted to thank everyone for playing along. Whether you've been playing in the background or sending in your community comments, a huge thank you from me. The Zelda Game Club is a community-driven series here on Triforce Times, and without you playing along and your comments, it wouldn't be half as fun as it is. It's great to go back and play through these classic games, and it's even better when we can do it as a community and play through these together and share our experiences. So thank you to everyone who contributed, really appreciate it, and I hope you enjoyed. Well, I want to kick off with a community comment from BombZeCoffee, and they say, I've completed it, and for the first time, this game is probably the best 2D Zelda game. I haven't played Minish Cap just yet. The hardest boss is Cold Stare and Mothula, and the easiest boss is Helmasaur King and Vitreous. And my favourite boss was the first one, but I think it's now Trinex. It's such a cool looking boss. I like how you have to use the Fire Rod and the Ice Rod to defeat it. Well, thank you for writing in, BombZeCoffee. It's great to hear from you, and it's great to hear that you completed the game. Trinex is a very cool boss. I love that Ice and Fire Rod mechanic too, although that was a really super tough boss fight. I want to go over to another community comment now. This one is from Master Knight DH. And Master Knight says, so when I first played through the game on a copy owned by a brother-in-law, who I should mention has been macho enough, I got scared off by the initial guards and their pointy things that they obviously had in my direction. It wouldn't be until a few years later when I would try out A Link to the Past again. It wouldn't be long before I was happy to go into getting the 000, as well as doing things like go through dark rooms without lighting up torches, or take on the armless knights with just a boomerang. Obviously, well before the days of YouTube, but nowadays I've been going for covering a no damage, effective minimalist playthrough, although at this point I've yet to fully record the final part, that is Ganon's Tower, because of real life politics getting in the way, but I've been doing practice on the important parts. And it's funny that I fashioned myself as a squishy wizard, and not without reason, as I would be displayed if you ever saw how I handled the shooting minigame just south of the village of Outcasts. Even to this day, when I'm here, I'm feeling like Season 5 in Samurai Jack. Obviously, no knocks on A Link to the Past after some of my other self-imposed challenge ventures. Just the real-life politics getting in the blasted way. I think this should help punctuate the importance of individuality in a healthy community, helped by both myself and Link being naturally left-handed. Well, thank you, Master Knight DH. I appreciate your comments. It really sounds like you are a pro at this game. If you're going through the dark rooms without a light and defeating boss with just a boomerang, the no damage, effective minimalist playthroughs sound really interesting. I have to do some research myself on YouTube for that one. More from Master Knight DH later on in the episode, but for now, let's dive back into the Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. Well, we left things off last time, having just beat Gargoyle's domain, and now it's time to make our ways to the Ice Palace. But before we do that, given recently we've got the Titan's Mitt, that means we can grab a few things in the overworld, and that's going to make our adventure much easier. That includes rescuing one of the blacksmiths from the Dark World, taking him back to the Light World, and reuniting him with his brother. As a reward, they're going to temper your sword, meaning you are going to be able to do more damage than before. So given the dungeons and the enemies are going to get tougher from this point, this is going to be invaluable. Well, the Ice Palace is located near Lake Hylia, so you have to make your way over there in the Light World, lift up the rock, and then teleport to the Dark World to begin the next dungeon. The Ice Palace is another step up in difficulty. The floors are often covered with ice. The clue is in the name, making it hard to get around the dungeon, and the puzzles become much more intricate too, with combinations of mechanics that we've seen in other places, like switch blocks and cracks in the floor to get around. The unique item here is the blue armor, which is going to help Link take less damage, and this is a valuable item as we progress through the game. We're going to need every tool in our arsenal to take on Ganon at the end of the game, so make sure you pick up that armor and those upgrades when you can. Now, it's not before long you take on the boss Cold Stare, who is initially encased in ice. Naturally, the fire rod is going to become very useful here, so melt the ice casing from the boss, finish him off, and then save the maiden. Well, let's go back to Master Knight DH, and they say, at any rate, our journey is coming to an end. The final 3 of the Dark World 7 regular dungeons are much more focused on gimmicks, but do maintain a decent sense of difficulty. The bosses also do what they can to discourage over-reliance on the magic cape. I think that's a good thing. With Cold Stare and Trinex outright requiring magic items to even damage, and Vitreous having his supporting eyeballs be durable enough. I end up liking Cold Stare in terms of gameplay, slightly less than Helmasaur King because of the magic item requirement, but the second phase is surprisingly a fair challenge, even if it comes at the end of the Ice Palace with its issues in the game's stiff ice physics. Vitreous, however, has his Lightning be randomly capable of reaching too high on the sides, and generally has underwhelming design, and Trinex, although he does at least fit into his theme by being a stone wall, does have the bulk of his difficulty in the first phase where the magic item requirement is still a persisting problem, not helped by the ice rod potentially being missing all the way to this point, even if the magic mirror being available for a treat is still an option. Trinex side heads do at least die quickly enough against the golden sword, hitting them in a stun time, but if you've just got the Master Sword, be prepared to wade through a shocking durability for each of them. Well, thanks once again, Master Knight. That is a good assessment of the bosses in this final part. Yeah, Trinex at times is very difficult, and I can't really imagine going against this boss with your minimalist runs. I had trouble with him, and I had the upgraded sword at this point. I didn't mind the fire and the ice heads. It's the unbelievable damage that you can get from the middle head when it stretches out. I think at one point it took off 99% of my energy down. It was really, really shocking. Well, let's go back to the gameplay. So next up we've got Misery Mire. We have to make our way to Misery Mire. And we're going to need to head to the Light World, warp over to the desert, and then teleport back to the Dark World. Once we do this, it's a matter of using the Ether Medallion in the right place to open the entrance to the dungeon. Misery Mire is a fantastic dungeon, one of the best in the game. Unfortunately, I lost my footage of Misery Mire as I had an error during the recording and could not recover the footage. Therefore, I'm not going to linger too much on Misery Mire, other than it has one of the most important items in the game, and that is the Cane of Samaria. This is a magical cane that allows us to create blocks, and in future dungeons, going to come in really handy, essential in fact. Also platforms that are going to allow us to get around, so it really, really is a crucial item. The dungeon itself is very intricate with interconnecting warp pipes, places where you have to fall through the floor in particular places, and hookshot based puzzles. Then you've got the boss here, that is Vitreous, as we talked before with Master Knight DH. A collection of big eyes who can fire lightning at you. Beating this boss requires a deadshot aim with the bow and arrow, but before long you're going to beat the boss, then it's on to the next dungeon. Okay, back over to BombZeCoffee, and BombZeCoffee says the dungeon in this game really, really incredible. They could take me about an hour to do, and the puzzles in every dungeon don't really feel the same, but they are challenging. Like the one in the Ice Palace where you have to push that block down a hole, then go down to where it fell down and push it onto the switch. And if you get the wrong block, you have to go through the dungeon to get to the right point where you push the block and push the right one. My favourite dungeon is Gargoyle's Domain. The part I like about it is where you have to save the girl from jail, and she turns out to be the boss. Well, BombZeCoffee, I agree. These are some of the best dungeons in the early 2D Zelda games. And really, the step up from the first 2 games is there for all to see. Graphics, gameplay, dungeon design, all really, really good. And really, one of the reasons why it's up there with the best games ever made. Gargoyle's Domain does have to go down as one of the best dungeons for sure. I love the fact they switched up the mechanics in the boss fight. The Ice Palace is a really good dungeon too, and pushing that block down the hole so you can interact with it is really, really clever. The dungeons in this game simply get better and better as you go. Well, talking about dungeons, let's get back to Turtle Rock. So this is the one where Princess Zelda is being kept, and before we head into Turtle Rock, we can pick up another important item in the game, and that is the Golden Sword. So for this, we're going to need to travel to the bomb shop in the Dark World and pick up the Super Bomb before escorting it to the crack in the wall on the Pyramid of Power. So blow a hole open in the wall here with the Super Bomb, and we're going to reveal another fairy fountain, which we can throw items into. So if we throw in the sword, it'll be returned. It's going to be even better than before. Now the tempered blade becomes the golden blade. meaning even more damage for enemies. Again, a very valuable tool in the battle against Ganon. You can also throw in your bow and arrow. You're going to get the silver arrows, another key item needed to beat Ganon. Well, the penultimate dungeon is located up on Death Mountain, and it's called Turtle Rock. So we have to climb Death Mountain in the Light World, then warp to the Dark World, use the Quake Medallion to reveal the entrance. So once you've done that, head inside for one of our toughest challenges yet. So Turtle Rock is a platform-focused dungeon. Here we need the Cane of Samaria to create platforms to ride around and navigate using the direction points. These puzzles can be really perplexing at times, and also dangerous given the amount of fire Link is going to encounter. So a few fairies in bottles or potions really come in handy. The main item in the dungeon is the Mirror Shield, an iconic item in the Legend of Zelda, allowing Link to reflect certain attacks and laser beams that get sent his way. The dungeon itself is really challenging, mainly due to the strengths of the enemies and the platforming. You've also got a section of interconnecting pipes. That bit can be quite confusing, but with trial and error, you make your way through in good time. Well, the boss in this dungeon is one of the most powerful and deadly that we've seen in the game so far, and they're called Trinex. It's a three-headed turtle dragon creature. One head spits ice, one head spits fire, and then you've got the central head, which is really deadly. So we're going to need the fire rod to defeat the ice head, the ice rod to defeat the fire head, and then we can take out the boss in the final phase with just the sword. Now at this point, if you've got the golden sword, it's going to make your job much easier. So once you defeat that boss and you save Princess Zelda, she's ready to open up Ganon's tower with the 6 other maidens. Well, before we go over to Ganon's tower, let's go back to Master Knight DH. Master Knight says, I do note that the Ether Medallion can be obtained as soon as the Master Sword is obtained, though out of the way. However, the Cane of Samaria, of course, in Misery Mire, and the Silver Arrows requires clearing Misery Mire first, as well as helping out the blacksmith, from what I heard, because until then, the Super Bomb for opening up the mysterious pond is not available. As for unnecessary items, the Bombus Medallion isn't too far away from the Swamp Palace, as I mentioned, and it can be used for one-hit KOing Cold Stairs first phase as opposed to using the Fire Rod, which requires all 8 shots without halved magic costs for that. Speaking of halved magic costs, from the ever so funny Mad Batter, that is required to reach the Cane of Burner without taking damage. I can cite that the Cane of Burner has a higher cost per cast than the Magic Cape, but its overtime cost is lower, so it is favourable with fewer casts. Also, getting the Titan's Mitt, the Master Sword can be upgraded to the Tempered Sword, and the Tempered Sword can be upgraded to the Golden Sword in the same place with the Silver Arrows, and both cases involve a jump in damage output, because damage balancing wasn't the most active point in the 90s, although the Golden Sword does still set off the Yomo Medusas. Well, what we have is that the equipment balance is still overall decent to the end. Well, once again, Master Knight DH, really good insight there. Really appreciate the detail that you go into. But next up, let's go over to Ganon's tower. So once you've saved Zelda, we've got a couple of things to do. So get through Ganon's tower, defeat Aghanim, and then take on Ganon himself. Well, it's time to head to Ganon's tower. With the power of the 7 maidens, we can open it up by force. Well, Ganon's tower is large and it's a complicated dungeon with many twists and turns. So the main item in the dungeon is the red armor upgrade. That's going to be really useful when taking on Ganon, as this allows us to soak up more damage. You know, Ganon's tower is the culmination of all dungeons in the game, with many puzzles, switches, revealing chests and finding keys. It's everything that you would expect from the final dungeon in terms of difficulty and complexity. So you've got a great section here with invisible floors, where you have to use lanterns to reveal the floor tiles, and then quickly run across there before they disappear once again. Well, Ganon's tower is also a boss rush, facing off against many bosses we've seen in the previous dungeons. Armos Knights are back, plus we get to face off against the Landmolus once again. Moldorm is back too, making this a very nostalgic run through some of the best bosses in the game. Well, before long, Aghanim shows up, and this time there's 3 of him. So the key to defeating Aghanim is looking out for the shadows, and the darkest shadow indicates the real Aghanim, and the fight is similar to the fight we had before. We have to reflect back his magic attacks, and after a few hits, he's down for the count, and Ganon rises from the defeated body of the evil wizard Aghanim, and he flies away and then crashes into the Pyramid of Power, creating a huge hole. Well, now it's time for the final showdown against Ganon. Well, before we get to the final boss fight, let's go back to Master Knight DH for a review of Ganon's Tower. So Master Knight says, Ganon's Tower itself, basically the Great Palace done right, is a solid climactic final level. So it more or less puts the player's skill to the test to see if they've learned well how to use the tools at their disposal, with plenty of threats being familiar, but in the newer scenarios as defences designed to deter Link from reaching Ganon at the top of the tower to the best of their ability. Most of it is fair, although the last two BMOS rooms on 4F cross into being inane due to the game's stiff ice physics being particularly problematic in both of them, so they deserve to be cheapened out. Rematches against the Lightworld bosses with added changes are a nice touch as well, even if the Armos Knight's refight suffers from the game's ice physics, and the refights in general actually involve the player having added options themselves, most notably in the Lamola fight if you have full health for the sword beam attack. And you can definitely show them you've come a long way. Aghanim himself goes for practically in-hitting Link via the shadow clones, creating a claustrophobic situation and abandoning all the flash, no substance lightning attack, although whether he accounts for outlasting him is a different story altogether, from the shadow clones' own fireballs being reflectable without fail. Well, next up we've got the final boss fight against Ganon, and it's all been leading to this, and the final Ganon fight is absolutely no joke. For this, you're going to need fairies in bottles or potions to restore health and magic, and it's going to take every ounce of strength to defeat Ganon. Now, we've got a few distinct phases of the battle, so first up, Ganon is going to throw his trident at you, so you have to be wary of that. Sneak in there for a few attacks before you move on to the next phase. Next, Ganon is going to teleport and surround himself in fiery bats, who then attack you, so you have to be careful of those projectiles, and make sure to get close enough to Ganon to hit him, without taking too much damage. After a few hits, Ganon then starts to stomp, smashing the floor tiles away, leaving you with room to fall. Ganon compliments you on your fighting skill, but then ramps things up a notch by blowing out the light. And when it's dark, you can't see Ganon, in a callback to the first Legend of Zelda final boss fight, so you have to make sure the lanterns are lit, hit him with a sword, and then fire a silver arrow into his stunned body. Repeat this process 4 times and that's it. Ganon is defeated and the Triforce is yours. Well, what follows is a great closing scene with the Triforce requesting Link hold it above his head with a wish in his heart. We're then treated to a great final cutscene. I can just feel the hairs standing up on my arm right now as I talk about it, and the people of Hyrule are living in peace. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to show that whole final scene at the end of the video, so if you haven't seen the end of A Link to the Past, what you can do is check out the rest of the video and then watch it at the end. Let's go back over to Master Knight DH. So the final battle with Ganon himself involves Ganon, southpaw that he is, as a Shadow 2 Link, doing what he can to confound Link and wear him down with his 4 phases in total, the second of which is a hotspot for the minimalist no damage run, thanks to the blazing bats that continually lunge at him, with the starting one being random enough to create compromising situations, putting mastery of the spin attack in high demand to end the phase sooner. The last phase is simply about using the available tools to finally bring down Ganon the way the Legends expects, a reminder of how the game saw fit to make Ganon intangible against the Magic Hammer, or else the Magic Hammer would be able to apply the same damage stun as the Master Sword spin attack, when the latter is more versatile against Ganon's projections anyway, but the Adventuring Spirit is still fitting, helped by Ganon actually being fought near where the mysterious pond with the silver arrows is, as well as the torch ports being reachable by the lamp to make movement routes still available. So it's a really good way to bookend these scenarios, so beginning the whole adventure by wading through the dark on a stormy night with a lamp to see our way in the darkness, and then we allow for chasing down the Prince of Darkness also with a lamp. Well, thank you, Master Knight DH, really appreciate your comments. Now I want to head over to BombZeCoffee, who has a suggestion. So what would be cool for this game would be if it had weather in the overworld, like in the start of the game with the storm. You know, it could last about 2 minutes, and in the dark world, it could have something like acid rain that could deal a bit of damage, and you have to avoid it to take shelter and wait it out, although it might make the game harder, especially with the enemies hurting you. If I had to rate this game, it would be 8 out of 10. Well, thank you very much there, BombZeCoffee. Thank you for your final comment, and I'm really glad that you played through with this Zelda Game Club and finished off the game. Now, I really like the idea of rain and different weather conditions, especially the acid rain. That is a really cool idea. I do imagine Nintendo are probably constrained with the hardware and what they could do on the SNES, although that opening scene where Link wakes up and has to go to Hyrule Castle has to be one of the best openings to a video game. I absolutely love it. I'd probably lean more towards a 9 or 10 out of 10 rather than an 8, but I do think that is fair. Thank you once again for playing along, BombZeCoffee. Really appreciate you playing and sending in your comments. Well, for the final comment, let's go back to Master Knight DH. So our reward is obtaining the Triforce and using it to undo the damage done in the conflict, reviving the casualties, Link's uncle, the king, the soldiers, the loyal sage, the Ocarina boy, all as a result. I'd almost say it's sort of a prototype to what is involved in a certain show some 26 years down the line, when that show was answering, in its own welcome way, against the Death Note's pessimism about what people would actually do with power. But A Link to the Past does display actively what the people are doing afterwards, whereas the show in question barely displays the revived people being happy about the continued existence, so point in Link to the Past's favour. At any rate, we have a case of earn your happy ending after what Link had to go through. The credits music is a reminder about that whole experience being over, but as long as things have ended well enough, that is what is important. So when all is said and done, A Link to the Past, while still having moments of showing its design to be experimental, is still polished all around, and between itself and Secret of Evermore is a show of the Super Nintendo, despite still being early in the evolution process of game design, being proof of how much TLC supports game design. So it's been a pleasure to have been part of this. Until next time, may courage, power and wisdom lead to the Triforce. Well, really fantastic words there to close us out, Master Knight DH, and I really want to thank you for playing along and sharing your really detailed insight. Has been really valuable. Well, that concludes this Zelda Game Club, the Legend of Zelda, A Link to the Past, Part 3 of the Zelda Game Club, and of course the finale. It's been an absolute pleasure going back and playing this game. I hadn't played it all the way through from the start to completion like this since I first played it when it first came out in the 90s, when me and my friends spent a summer playing through it on the original Super Nintendo. Once again, I want to thank everybody for taking part in the Zelda Game Club. It's been an absolute pleasure reading your comments and playing through this game with you. Well, let me know in the comments what you think about A Link to the Past and also what you like about the Zelda Game Club. What do you want to see more of? What do you want to see less of? I'm committed to playing through the Legend of Zelda back catalogue with you, the Triforce Times community, and together I'm looking forward to making this series better and better over time. Well, next up we've got Link's Awakening. I'm going to be playing through the modern remake of Link's Awakening on the Nintendo Switch. I don't have an exact date for when we're going to be playing through this as a community, but it's likely to be in early 2023, as I'm going to get back to making videos in the build-up to Tears of the Kingdom, plus delving deep into the stories of Hyrule and sharing them with you all. Well, thank you once again for playing. It's been absolutely great fun, and for more Legend of Zelda content like this, hit that subscribe button down below and subscribe to Triforce Times, or you can check me out on Twitter at Triforce Times. Well, if you enjoyed this video, found it useful, liking and sharing the video would really help me out. Otherwise, check out the other videos on the channel. Well, thanks again, and I'll see you soon.